Hi, I'm Peyton from LawCloud. I'm happy to be here today with securities attorney Usman Shaikh of US Law Group in Beverly Hills, California. Usman is here to answer frequently asked questions about the Form C process. The Form C is a detailed disclosure document that is required to be filed with the SEC by any company raising money through equity crowdfunding. Thank you for joining me, Usman. I would love for you to start by sharing a brief overview of your background and specifically your experience working with small companies preparing to launch a crowdfunding campaign.
Thanks for having me, Peyton. Great to be here. I started my career over 15 years ago as a corporate transactional attorney on Wall Street, where I worked primarily in the areas of securities and corporate finance. Eventually, I moved to the West Coast and founded my law firm, US Law Group. Our firm is now bi-coastal with offices here in Beverly Hills and in New York City. Our mission has always been to bring the sophistication of big law to the attention of a boutique firm. Now, right as our law firm was establishing itself as a premier boutique firm for corporate transactions, regulation crowdfunding came into effect, specifically in 2016. This gave smaller businesses and startups unprecedented access to the capital markets. Prior to Reg CF, crowdfunding was generally limited to rewards-based investments. For example, like on Kickstarter, where people would get rewards, such as early access to a product for contributing capital to a startup. But Reg CF changed all of that. And with my background as a securities lawyer who worked on these big IPOs on Wall Street, it was a natural fit to help navigate smaller startups through this new and exciting area of securities laws. And Reg CF has evolved over the years, and I've kept up to speed since then, and I've been able to advise my clients on the various changes in the law.
A lot of companies aren't sure what type of security to issue. Can you talk about the different types of securities and which ones are most common?
I think when the general public thinks of startups raising capital, they envision Shark Tank, where a founder is giving up X percentage of his or her company for a certain dollar amount. That is traditional equity financing, whereby a company, we call them the issuer, is selling shares of its common stock at an agreed upon share price. And that's generally what we see in crowdfunding offerings these days. We rarely see preferred stock, for example, being issued in equity crowdfunding because, generally speaking, preferred stock offerings are usually done in later rounds that involve venture capital investors. But over the years, issuers have started offering other forms of securities under Reg CF. We now see securities such as convertible notes being offered, which are essentially debt instruments that convert into equity upon the occurrence of certain events, such as a future financing round or a merger or an acquisition. If one of these events doesn't happen within a certain period of time, the investor is entitled to repayment of the investment plus interest, or they can convert into equity. Now, some Reg CF platforms have gotten creative and started offering securities known as crowd safes. SAFE, which stands for Simple Agreement for Future Equity, are securities that are similar to convertible notes in that they convert into equity in the future, but unlike convertible notes, they are not debt instruments in that they don't have a maturity date. And for the most part, that's very favorable for the issuer. A crowd safe will convert at the discretion of the issuer. And again, because they're not debt instruments, the investor really doesn't have any right to demand payment if a triggering event doesn't occur.
What are the reasons why issuers would choose a convertible note over a safe? And what is the difference between the two?
Whether in crowdfunding or in private placements, the main reason an issuer will choose a convertible note or a safe is to avoid the need to determine a valuation for their company. Coming up with the right valuation, especially for an early stage company, is quite tricky, and it can have long-term consequences for both the company and investors. You can lose investors if they think that the company is overvalued, for example. Now, going back to that Shark Tank example, we've all seen founders haggle over the valuation of their company with the sharks and how much of it to give up. Well, convertible notes and safes avoid this issue because, again, they're not equity securities, so they don't need to have a determined share price. While both convertible notes and safes convert into equity upon triggering events, as I pointed out earlier, the main difference between the two are that convertible notes are debt, meaning that they have a maturity date, and upon its expiration, the investor gets repaid or gets to convert. And notes are generally reflected as debt on the balance sheet of a company. Now, a SAFE, on the other hand, is not a debt instrument, so it doesn't have a maturity date, and it doesn't show up as debt on the company's balance sheet. It's literally, as its name suggests, a simple agreement for future equity. If the triggering event doesn't happen, the investor has no recourse. Now, I should mention that while safes are common in venture capital and in private placements, where investors are in the business of investing and highly sophisticated, there is some controversy around crowd safes in the crowdfunding space rather. In fact, in 2017, the SEC issued an investor bulletin cautioning investors against crowd safes. This came about because of the public's general lack of knowledge as to how safes work and the SEC's stated mission to protect investors. The bulletin was designed to educate the public, specifically pointing out that safes are not equity, that there is a chance that they will never convert into equity, and that the investor has no right to getting repaid their investment. So it was kind of a cautionary bulletin to let the public know about these new forms of securities being offered.
What about issuing a straight debt versus a convertible debt?
Good question. There are a handful of Reg CF portals that offer debt crowdfunding. In these scenarios, the investor lends money to the company and gets repaid according to a set payment schedule or from the issuer's profits or revenues. These are more common in, for example, real estate deals or restaurant deals than, say, for example, tech startups.
It's so helpful to have spent this time with you, getting some insight on these seemingly complex topics. Before we end, can you share your thoughts on working with a legal technology partner such as LawCloud to help improve the overall Form C experience and to bring down legal costs for small companies?
I love LawCloud. LawCloud came into being around 2016, right when Reg CF was implemented, and it's been at the forefront of Reg CF ever since. And I've been working with LawCloud since the beginning. LawCloud basically provides a tool that streamlines the Form C process. For those who may not know, a Form C is an offering memorandum similar to a PPM for private placements that gets filed with the SEC prior to a Reg CF campaign going live. The Form C has many disclosure requirements, including business and securities risk factors that a layperson generally would not know how to properly address. And hiring a law firm to create a Form C from scratch can be expensive. And of course, you'd have to find a lawyer who not only specializes in securities laws, but is up to speed on Reg CF. So LawCloud has an easy to use interface that allows issuers to input information, which is then generated into a Form C, fully compliant with SEC regulations. The Form C then goes to a lawyer like me for review, and it gets filed directly with the SEC through the LawCloud portal. It's very time and cost effective.
Thank you so much for your time today, Usman. I know that some issuers will have more specific questions about the structure of their raise and wanted to let everyone know that you'll be offering starter consultations as well as the Form C attorney review through LawCloud. Please follow the instructions on the next screen to get in touch. Thank you everyone for being here, and we'll see you again soon.